This is part 2 of a talk that I gave to some people at the local library, photo hobbyists that wanted to try and improve their work. So in this part, we're going to start with looking at composition. Photography is both art and science, and the camera and settings have to do with the science, and how you compose the picture has to do with the art of photography. So over the years, painters, people who draw pictures, and people who photograph have come up with certain kinds of guidelines that they turn to every once in a while in order to take a good picture and try and turn it into a better picture. So one of the compositional guidelines talks about the importance of having leading lines in your pictures. Now, before I try and generalize, we do understand that not every picture is going to have leading lines in it. If you see something in a picture and you think that there's a potential for using lines to lead to the center of interest, in this case it's the archway, and you make a note that the edge of the reflecting pool and the trees seem to naturally guide your eye towards the center of interest, the arch, that is what we call making use of leading lines. So if you see that and you can make that work, try it. See if it makes your picture better. I find that sometimes people put leading lines in their pictures, and the leading lines take your eye more or less to no place. And that's not a good thing. So remember this, if you're going to have leading lines and it's going to create an eye traffic pattern, have the leading lines end up at some sort of center of interest. So here the roadway, the pathway ends up with a very interesting set of rocks, or maybe it's an old wall of some type, and a sun. Here are, the picture would have been an interesting picture without the person, but since there's a person in the picture, it's even better. So our eyes travel by curved lines, and they end up pointing to the person in the picture. Now, operating a camera and composing photos are both very important to making memorable pictures. Lighting can make or break a picture as well. So there's another thing to be thinking about. We talk about quantity of light and we talk about quality of light. And what we want to do is we would like to take our subject and come up with a concept in our head, a thought about what we want to say about this particular subject, and then we would like to figure out which kind of lighting would enhance the concept or the meaning that we're trying to do. So harsh light, sometimes called specular light, it comes from a point light source, a very small light source, and it casts very dark shadows, and some of those shadows have very crisp edges. And then we also have soft light. And in a studio, you might think about a big square white light box called a soft box. And what happens is that the strobe that fires inside of the softbox gets spread out and diffused over a large area. So if we're shooting the baseball, if we're shooting that in a studio and we have a softbox, then the picture of the ball is much brighter and easier to read. Uh, it is a tragedy when you have a friend and you like that friend and you take a picture of that friend with the wrong light. So here we have the worst case scenario on the left. It's a pretty good rule of thumb to say that human features are not flattered by harsh, strong light. Um, if you take a picture of your friend outdoors, midday, no clouds in the sky, you will put deep pools of shadow in their eyes, and all of a sudden their eyes will kind of quit being there. And so you're turning your friend into the old pirate flag where you have a skull uh, instead of a person's features. So please take nice pictures of your friends. And in order to do that, you would like to move them out of the bright, harsh sunlight and find an open shade where maybe it's the eaves of a building or put them on a porch someplace. And now their features are lit with what's called bounce light. And that's a kind of lighting that is much softer and more flattering to people. So no harsh light for people unless you're taking a picture of Death Valley Scotty and the person has lots and lots of character lines, sometimes called wrinkles, and they're proud of it. Yeah, okay. Or if you're taking a picture of a football player and you want to make that football player look mean and macho, then you could use harsh light on that type of subject. But the vast majority of people we use soft light on. Catalog photographers are faced with which kind of light to use. Uh, in a catalog photo, you have to be able to capture the texture and the feel of the materials. And so that taking maybe both pictures and then looking at them in final proof will make the decision for you. Now, three-dimensionality, we like to trick people into thinking that the flat picture has 3 dimension to it. And one way we do this is by using side light. So instead of the light falling fully on the face of the person, now the light is moved off of the shoulder and the light is coming in from the side. That creates a shadow on the nose. That makes for 3 dimensionality. And here's another example of side light, and you can see the cast shadow. That helps the eye make some judgments as to the form that is casting that shadow. And boy, oh boy, this reminds me of going up to Sedona up to the creek up there, Oak Creek, and taking pictures of tree roots and fallen leaves. October, good month to be traveling to Sedona to take those kinds of pictures. And side light is going to be the winning form of light for this type of work. Here we have another reinforcement that people look better, maybe on a cloudy day, that's open shade. Or if you have a large area of shadow underneath a tree, you can soften up the looks. Anytime you see somebody in front of your camera that is squinting at you, it's a reminder, do not take this picture. If they are squinting at you, they will not have a pleasant expression on their face. Um, Pictures can be restful or pictures can be active. And if you are after a restful kind of picture, then look around for major curves. And if you can put these curves into your first 4 lines, which are the edges of the picture, the camera gives you 2 vertical, 2 horizontal lines, and then you can put a major curve in there. That's going to make for a relaxing looking picture. Here you have a diagonal line taking off from the lower left and going to the upper right, and it is a movement line. It takes the eye and shoots it back into the picture. It helps to lead the eye through the picture. Some about shadows here. While harsh light may not be good for people, harsh light is very good in creating shadows. And shadows can certainly add a lot of interest to landscape photos. Favorite time for scenic photography is morning and evening. It's called golden light, and the shadows are long. So there's all sorts of visual excitement in the subject matter that you're pointing your camera at. There's golden light again. Now, window light portrait is a time tested type of lighting for doing nice pictures of people. On the left over here, you have the main source of light is the window, and hopefully it's a north facing window, and that will make sure that the light coming in is very diffused. If you have a east facing window, you might want to put a piece of clear plastic, like an old dry cleaning bag or a piece of shower curtain, to soften the light as it comes in. The subject is in the middle, and then on the right side of that window light setup, you have a bounce board, which is nothing more than a big white sheet of poster board. Cameras tend to exaggerate the darkness of shadows. So without the bounce board, our subject would have too high of a contrast of light. The side of the face closest to the window would be bright, and the other side would be too dark. So if you can capture some of that light from the window and capture it by bouncing it back using a reflector board, that helps to even out and still keeps the dimensionality to it. The picture in the flute player give your people something to do so they're not just standing there looking at the camera. Uh, if you have a prop involved, like the flute here, it adds meaning to the picture as well. Uh, if you have people looking straight at the camera or straight to the side, you have what's called a mug shot. You have a full face or you have a profile. A three-quarter pose is halfway in between. So the person is not looking straight into the camera. They are looking off to the side. The chin is not pointed straight at the camera. It's looking off to the side. If you went to a portrait gallery and looked at portraits down through the ages, you'd find that many portrait painters use a three-quarter view. Now, a merger is not a good thing. It can make a picture funny. And every once in a while on the web, you see a little gallery of humorous photographs. Well, a lot of those humorous photographs come from what we call a merger. The subject, which is in the foreground, and an object in the background, like the fountain, have merged and they appear to be on the same picture plane. Uh, it's not unusual in people photography for the photographer to be so interested in capturing the right expression or the right look that they forget to scan the edges. They don't look around the edges of the picture to see what else is in the shot. And then later on, when they are proofing their pictures and they're looking, they just kind of slap their forehead and say, oh, what a dummy I am. I made a merger here. And it's a funny shot, but you don't like those. So watch out for mergers. Um, Posing one person is tricky. Posing a whole group of people is much trickier. The the default is the lineup, and you put everybody in a line and you say, look at the camera, and you say, smile at the birdie. And generally speaking, it is a document. It tells you who is there, but it's not a real flattering kind of picture. So group photographers have figured out that it's probably better to kind of break people up into clumps. And this is a nice example here of how people are integrated into a beautiful setting. Everybody is shown. In a wedding portrait, we love to see what the bride's dress, what the groom's wearing, all the different fashions that are going on. And this picture gives a nice informal attitude. It's not like everybody's standing at attention in some military formation. Now, besides having program mode, automatic mode, aperture priority mode, many cameras also have specific subject modes. And in this case, people who build cameras, they know that lots of people who buy cameras are going to be taking pictures of people. So they have given you a portrait mode. And when you swivel your dial into portrait mode, the automatic features take over. They give you a large lens opening which will blur out the background. They even make a few little tweaks on the programming inside the camera, and they try and make the flesh tones work as good as they can. So when you're doing portrait mode, you're having some assistance from the electronics inside of your camera. By the way, when you're focusing on a person for a portrait, you want to make sure that the eyelashes in the eye closest to the camera are tack sharp focus. It's quite easy for autofocus to focus on the wrong part of a person, and then the eye becomes slightly fuzzy, and that is not a good people picture. We want to see the eye closest to the camera in absolute sharp focus. You may have to take it off of autofocus. On the lens of the camera, DSLR, there's a switch which will switch between M for manual focus and AF for autofocus. You may have to switch it to M and then very carefully adjust the focus ring so that the eye closest to the camera is in tack sharp focus. I'm going to let you read this. It has to do with the similarities between cooking and exposure. If you put something in the oven and you leave it in there too long, it's going to be burnt. And if you eat it, you're not going to like the taste of it. That is overcooking. That's the same with photography and overexposure. However, if you leave the food in the oven too short, it's not going to cook, and you're going to be eating raw potatoes, which are not very tasty. So just like in cooking, the photographer tries to avoid over and under, and they want that sweet spot. They want the just right amount of exposure. If you're not sure of exactly what the right exposure is, your camera has a bracketing function, and you'll have to look that up in your camera guidebook. And you can set up your camera to take 3 pictures in a row. And the first picture will be at what the meter says is right. And the second one might be 1 exposure over that. And the third one exposure under that. And then when you're sitting down later and you're examining your proofs, then you can say, oh, I think I like this one. So don't be a stranger to your camera guidebook and look up something like bracketing a photograph. Back to landscape, make sure that you have a foreground center of interest, and in this case it would be the flowers that are kind of lit up in the foreground, and a background center of interest. We like to have 3 different grounds in a picture: foreground, middle ground, and background. Here again, we're going back to leading lines and an eye traffic pattern. Your eye follows the pathway from the lower center of the picture, takes off to the right, curves around. There's a bench there for you to sit in, look out over the pond, and then the stones bring you looping back around. So you have kind of a circular eye traffic pattern going on here. Foregrounds of one value, lightness or darkness, middle grounds of another one, and the backgrounds of a third one. So our foreground here has a lot of light sky in it, and our middle ground has a lot of middle tones in it, and our background has that darker area and then the light sky again. So that's not always possible, especially in the desert where we have so much desert beige. But if you can look for patches of light, put them in the foreground, or patches of dark, put them in the foreground, and then you'll at least break up the landscape with some different lights and darks. Um, Landscape photographers follow the weather and they look for cold fronts because if there's a cold front, there's going to be cumulus clouds, and landscape photographers kind of feel cheated when the day is just bright and clear and no clouds in the sky. So many landscape photographers will tell you that look at the weather map, find out where there's some storms brewing, and take off in that direction because you may get some rain, but in between the rain, you'll get some nice clouds, you'll get some nice shadows, get some nice light. And I just want to point out that this one address here I don't think is an active link anymore, but photographers around the world have gone to YouTube and they've gone to the internet and they have shared all kinds of important photo tips and tricks with anybody who wants to look. So you don't really have to take a class. If you wanted to, you could educate yourself right off of the internet, and all sorts of things are available for you to learn about. So that is my email, and that is the end of Better Photography for Beginners.